Good afternoon. Sorry to interrupt your lunch. If I can get everyone's attention, please. Hello. Thank you. Well, it's great to see big turnout here. Yes, there's a little bit of interest in the Middle East on there. Probably some interest in Asia too, I suspect. But I see many old friends in the audience. I see a lot of new faces in the audience. That's a good sign. I see some students in the audience, and that's a very good sign. I hope you're getting to meet some of our great students here. I'm sure a lot of them will be coming in and out throughout the afternoon. And some of you in the room may not know who I am, so let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Jim Hollifield, and I'm a professor here at SMU and also the director of our center. A lot of people think that the Tower Center is an ivory tower. It's up on like the 30th floor of the tower, but actually we're in a very modest building over in the law school quad, and love to have you come over there and visit us at some point. But and we're definitely not in an ivory tower because we're out in the real world doing lots of things, taking our scholars programs all over the world. And this program is fairly typical of what we do, although I think this is the first time that we've actually brought these two regions together. I was joking with somebody as we were coming in that, you know, what does Asia have to do with the Middle East? And the answer is a lot. There's a tremendous amount of involvement of Asian powers in the region. And of course, we've got crises and conflicts, hot wars in Europe, hot war in the Middle East. And if you look at Asia, all of you who've been there, who study it, know it's very, very delicately balanced at the moment. And we're all sort of holding our breath that it remains that way. But I do want to take just a moment to welcome any of you who are here. Well, I see quite a few of you who are members of the Tower Center, of a membership group, and I want to welcome our Tower Center 4 members. We also have at least, looking around, only one board member that I see here who is our great colleague and friend, Ambassador Bob Jordan. You're going to hear from him a bit later in this program. He is our diplomat in residence and a leading authority on the Middle East. And before I turn the program over to my colleague Takeuchi Sensei, I just want to say a big special thanks to all of the staff of the Tower Center. You met some of them as you were coming in, and we take time to thank them because they're doing so much work behind the scenes. I especially want to thank our Associate Director, Ray Rafiti. Many of you have known Ray. He's been with the Tower Center for quite some time. He has a very strong interest in the Middle East, and he's one of the people who has been instrumental in promoting our study of the Middle East here on campus. He has a little help from one of my great friends in the history department, Dr. Sabri Hatesh, who's also sitting up here. And of course, I want to welcome all of our guests who have come, some of them all the way from Japan to join us. Mr. Firestone over here, who's come from Middle East Institute, and others. So you're going to hear more about these special guests as we move forward in the program. Please join me in welcoming to the program my great friend and colleague who directs our program on Japan and East Asia, also known as the Sun and Star program, Takeuchi Sensei.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. I'm George Takeshi, and I'm director of SoundStar program in Japan and East Asia. SoundStar program is star has to be a singular because we are in Texas. I'm so delighted to have this conference today. I spent my childhood in Saudi Arabia, and since then I have become an Asia specialist, and so I'm always interested in Middle East and then also its relationship between Asia and Middle East. These two regions are increasingly important, so this is very timely topic. Today, I'm so delighted to introduce keynote speaker, Professor Koichiro Tanaka. Professor Tanaka is, I would say, the best person to talk about the Asia-Middle East relations comprehensively. He has observed the change of Middle East and its relationship with Asia for a long time as a scholar, as a teacher, and as a diplomat. Professor Tanaka is an Iran specialist, speaking Farsi very fluently. And as a diplomat, he served in Iran and Afghanistan. And then as a scholar, he is an energy specialist, and he was serving for a long time as a researcher at the energy think tank in Japan. And then he's currently a professor at Keio University, also my alma mater. And he's teaching international relations of the Middle East and energy policy. So he's a person who has observed the change of the Middle East as a scholar, diplomat, and teacher. So please join me for welcoming Professor Tanaka.
Good afternoon. Professor Takeshi, thank you for the kind introduction. First of all, I'd like to thank the SMU and the faculty and all the guests here for allowing me to address you or talk to you about what I'm going to talk now. Actually, this is my first visit to SMU as well as to Dallas. I find it very interesting to see that it's quite different from a city like Houston, which I frequently have visited in the past. But nonetheless, Texas may be still Texas. I need to hear closer. Would that be fine? Yes, sir. And well, I'm short, so let me just begin by saying that I would like to address the issues related to the Asian states and the Middle East. But then I realized that, just like we've been talking for the past 2 nights with our colleagues, is that if we just simply regard this region as West Asia, things could have been much easier. Because when we talk about Asia and Middle East, then there is no, say, common ground. Okay? But Asia and West Asia actually does tell that the two geographical, say, entities are on the same continent, either Asia or Eurasia, whatever you call it. So let me just begin by addressing how the Chinese used to perceive the world, sort of a classic. It's in Chinese characters, so we have difficulties, but in the end, the real center of the circle represent what China is, what China was. And the outer rim would depict the lands that have been inhabited by savages, barbarians, brutish aliens, and wild tribes. Now, if you try to locate, actually, the upper hand represents the north, right hand towards east, and the left hand is towards the west. So Middle East or West Asia would be located in that direction, meaning that it is considered as the land of the brutish aliens and wild tribes. So that was the historical notion of how the people in China used to perceive the territory. But not forget, the locations that I've been mentioning about have been, well, connected thanks to the Silk Road that have been there for millennia. Now, this is the actual ancient Silk Road, which quite differs from the one that we find later when the Mongols actually take over. But even during the Han period, the road, the Silk Road that is represented here by the red line, does tell that China or Asia is connected with its Western neighbors or neighboring locations, and eventually would lead towards the Mediterranean and West Asia, West Asia. So that, having said that, I might have been tempted to use the phrase of West Asia all along, but since the symposium itself is titled as Middle East, I'll just revert back to addressing the issue of the Middle East and Asia. Now, let us go back to the history. It may be not that, maybe things that are not being so familiar to you, but the Middle East region connected with the Silk Road, the eastern part of Asia. And there have been records that show that in the past, Persians, Sogdians, Arabs, and other tribes, people belonging to other tribes, have been living in today's China during the days of the Tang Dynasty, and its capital city of Chang'an or Xi'an, the Latin name Xi'an. The rebellion of An Roshan, the half Sogdian and half Turk, in the mid-8th century against the ruling Tang dynasty, rattled the empire, which marked the beginning of the decline of its powers. It is worth mentioning that today's China hosts descendants of these ethnic groups from the Middle East as the minorities. Now, let me share with you an old story I learned from a former U.S. ambassador when I was serving my service. I heard this story like 25 years ago. So in those days, he was already retired. I'm not quite sure how old he may be today, but it was a very interesting and telling story. What he told me was that the incident, it was not the experience of himself. He got to know his story from his predecessors. So it's like in the 1920s or the 1930s, the mid-war terms, that an American had traveled to the northwestern part of China. What happened there was that when he was traveling, he located a structure resembling a synagogue. And as he approached the building, he heard voices of sermons coming from inside, and he himself, being a Jew, entered the synagogue and performed the rituals with the locals. When the performance ended, an elderly person, probably a rabbi, asked this American who he was and why he was sitting amongst them. He honestly revealed that he was a Jew, and then the rabbi, probably a Kaipan Jew, seemingly impressed to know that this strange person was also a Jew, then said to him, "But you don't look like a Jew at all." What does this story tell? It tells that northwestern part of China, even as of today, is like thousands of miles away from where Judaism emerged. But even in the first half of the 20th century, the descendants were there, performing their rituals of being in and continue their life for millennia. So that tells that yes, Asia and West Asia or Middle East has always been connected, regardless of by using the Silk Road or any other means, even by sea transport. They have been connected with each other. Now, historically, locations like Korea, the relationship between the Korean and the people from the Middle East happened to be mostly between Arabs and Persians who have traveled to the peninsula through China. In contrast, in Japan, a land that is separated from the rest of the continental Asia by sea, stores records of Persians and possibly Sogdians that have arrived from distant locations. And apparently, some of the immigrants that have served, some of the immigrants that have came over there had served as bureaucrats in the court of the emperor as early as the 9th century. Even prior to this migration, at the beginning of the 7th century, a mass dance performance referred to as Gigaku from West Asia was introduced to Japan. Now, what you can see here towards your left, these are the wooden sticks where the name of a Persian, Kiyomichi, actually is written. I mean, it's difficult to comprehend what is written. There's very tiny letters, and also it's, I say, worn out. But those who have been able to decipher it understood that it does tell about a Persian who was named Kiyomichi. Actually, Kiyomichi is a Japanese name. So apparently he got sort of a Japanese name after migrating. But he was hired at the court, emperor's court, and he was given status, and he was also paid for the service that he was performing. The right-hand side, you see a mask used for this gigaku. The shape of the nose, the coloring, and also the figure tells that is quite different from ordinary Japanese or Easterns or Eastern Asians. These happen to be the mask produced based on those who had traveled through China, through the peninsula to Japan, that had introduced this dance performance. This is another interesting text. It comes from the 13th century. There are Arabic inscriptions. Actually, it is Persian, modern Persian. Modern Persian refers to the Persian language that had reemerged following the Arab invasion, Arab Islamic invasion. It started to be used by the language itself differs from the medieval Persian, and also the scripture is different. The letters, the alphabets are different. Now they are using the Arabic alphabet. It was a mystery for all the Japanese of what was written there. Some of two of my mentors when I was studying at university, learning Marxist Persian, had gotten into the text and got to notice that it comes from two very famous Persian literature. One being Shahnameh al-Ferdowsi, the other being Visorani from Nizami Ganjali. So somehow the person, whether he traveled or taken as a slave, we don't know exactly who he was, has scripted this on a Japanese text, which was preserved for like 800 years or 900 years until today. And it was only about a couple decades ago that eventually people got to understand what it meant and what sort of language it was. Okay, it is preserved even today in a historical museum in Japan. There are other artifacts that had traveled all the way. There is a treasure house that belongs to the Todaiji Buddhist temple in Nara, one of the old capital cities of Japan. This treasure house stores a lot of artifacts that have been, well, given to the emperor or to the nobles of those days. And they're one of the most famous item is the one that you see in the middle. It is a glass bowl or glass cup. It is preserved very well, so you can see that it is half translucent and there's no cracks or anything. On the right-hand side, although it's a little bit shadowy, you see a distinctive figure, just like the one before that. This one is stored and exhibited in the Abugina Museum of Iran, Tehran, Iran. So it traveled all the way from somewhere in today's Iran through China and eventually ended up in a storage house in Japan. Well, this precedes Islam. This is during the Sasani period history. What else was happening? The famous Battle of Talas, where the two major empires of the era, meaning the Tang dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate, fought against each other, marked a very important moment in history. The prevailing Caliphate managed to keep Central Asia as part of its sphere of influence, while they concurrently benefited from the technology of manufacturing paper, which certainly contributed to the flourishing of the legendary Baitul Hikmah in the capital city of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom. So the Battle of Talas wasn't just a scene of clash of civilization. It happened to be a place where exchange of cultural exchanges took place between two dominant civilizations of the world. But peace and prosperity did not last forever for the Abbasids. The second Mongol invasion throughout the second half of the 13th century destroyed the priceless heritage of the early Islamic era in the Middle East. Still, the Mongols maintained the infrastructure of the Silk Road intact, an attitude that could be referred today as managing global commons. Now, if you just try to remember how the old Silk Road, ancient Silk Road used to look like, is quite different. Of course, it moves towards the western side of China and towards West Asia to the east. But here you also have connection to India. Now, these are all from those days when the Silk Road was quite active. Well, we now have to make a big leap in time. I want to talk about the modern days. Now, following the end of the Second World War, significance of the oil and gas-rich Middle East region grew stronger in the industrial world, and Asian countries were not left out of this phenomenon. Japan took one of the heaviest blows to its economy during the 1973 oil shock. Surge in oil prices imported by OPEC, associated with the announced boycott of oil exports by OPEC, led to higher inflation and social instability. The Japanese government, in fear that Japan may lose its vital oil supplies, dispatched emissaries to the relevant countries, in particular to the Middle East, and literally begged for the continuation of oil supplies. Simultaneously, the Japanese government launched an initiative to reduce its oil dependency to the Middle East. Measures that were introduced back then include gasification of thermal power plants, diversification of oil resources, and introduction of nuclear power plants in Japan. Japan also worked hard to secure oil concessions with oil-producing countries, including those from the Middle East. Republic of Korea, which harbored a strong pro-West diplomatic tendency during the Cold War period, established its post-war relationship with the Middle East with a country like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and so on and so forth. While South Korea forged formal diplomatic relations with the State of Israel in 1962, its northern neighbor, DPRK, immediately took advantage of the criticism against the South, and they established relationship with other countries like Egypt, Algeria, and North Yemen. Here it shows how Asian countries' diplomacy with the Middle East was influenced by the Cold War as well as the Palestinian question. Republic of Korea was also designated by the OPEC under the areas prohibited to export their oil. So by late 1973, ROK was obliged to announce its shift of basic policies vis-a-vis the Middle East and employ the Arab standpoint on Palestine. Notwithstanding the necessity for oil, South Korea faced a difficult time in winning trust of Arab oil producers. And for China, the importance of Middle East oil arose in tandem with its reform and opening policy and the subsequent development as an emerging economy. Demand for oil surged in the 1990s, while domestic oil production took a dive and dependence on imported oil grew extensively. By 2017, as you can see on the chart at the bottom, China became the largest oil importer, exceeding that of the United States. In an effort to consolidate its oil supplies, China began establishing and expanding its diplomatic relations with major oil producers in the Middle East, and in particular, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It is interesting to know that China and the Kingdom started their official relationship only in 1990. So it's like 40 years or so that China had established a formal diplomatic relationship with the king. Of course, today their relationship has grown stronger and very strong. But dependence on foreign oil drove the Asian countries, as well as others, to secure the strategic transit route of oil from the Middle East, namely the Strait of Hormuz and the Malacca Strait, that connect the sea lane extending from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea. Concerns over geopolitical developments in and around the Middle East also grew. Tensions in the region would be considered as serious threats to their energy security and economy. Asian countries, including China, remain deeply dependent on maintaining order and security of the trade route to be provided by the naval powers of the United States. Therefore, there is a growing criticism against the so-called free riders of security. The oil exporters are no exception to this. There was another problem. Investment from Asia in development projects was expected on the side of the Middle East. Sustained lower oil revenues starting from the second half of the 1980s until the early 2000s have left the once oil-rich producers paralyzed. Eventually, major wars like the Cold Gulf War of 1991, the war in Afghanistan, and then the war on Iraq have gradually paved the ground for the resurgence of oil prices and saved the day. There's a certain number of regional countries in the Middle East that are expanding its economic and commercial ties with Asian countries by signing an FTA, free trade agreement, or an EPA, economic partnership agreement. For instance, Korea has signed an FTA with GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, in December 2023. India inked an EPA with the UAE back in March 2022. Although China and Japan have not so far signed any FTA or EPA deal with the Middle East countries, the two are in pursuit of strategic partnership agreements with major economies in the Middle East. Japan is working closely with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to assist the implementation of the Saudi Vision 2030, while China is aligning its Belt and Road Initiative with the Saudi Vision. In March 2021, Iran and China announced the signing of a 25-year long-term cooperation arrangement, which is rumored to attract $400 billion of foreign direct investment to Iran. While the Middle East countries concentrated their effort on national development that had been put on hold for so long, there have been major setbacks for their Asian partners who have undertaken meaningful roles in the development phase of mega projects. In post-revolutionary Iran, the Band al-Imam petrochemical complex development project resulted in a disaster for its Japanese partners because of the damages inflicted by the invading Iraqi forces on the half-complete installations. Again in Iran, the Chinese oil companies have faced major setbacks that arose from the United States sanctions and the nature of the terrain where the development was taking place. The Chinese eventually left those onshore and offshore projects unfinished. In Libya, development of the Great Man-Made River Project was put on hold following the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. It was widely known that Korean companies were significantly involved in the project since its inception in the 1970s. Despite such drawbacks, China, along with Turkey, have earned affection from the Arab youth in the region, according to the accredited survey conducted by the Arab Youth Survey. Here you can see how much the Arab youth consider major countries, although from Asia, it's only China that is included here, but considered by them as being allies rather than foes. You could see in the middle there's the United States, which still earns like 70% plus of support, while the newcomers like China exceeds that of the United States. Of course, maybe the lesser the engagement, the more that they will have some sort of illusion of what China could do to them. Now, before I conclude my remarks, I would like to draw your attention to the possible avenues, where relations between Asia and the Middle East could expand in the near future. While Japan has hardly any role here, China and Korea's presence in the defense contracts with Middle East countries are outstanding. Not to forget, China and DPRK have been traditional arms suppliers to Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. Today, South Koreans are expanding their weapons exports to countries like Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The latest news of this kind is that Egypt will be procuring Chinese-made multi-role J-10C fighter jets to replace their aging American-made F-16s. The two countries' emergence, meaning Korea, South Korea, and China, as valuable strategic partners to the Middle East countries, will likely to continue given the rising tension in the region, where defense spendings are on its rise. India is also expanding its arms sales to and from Israel, its traditional defense equipment partner, amid the war in Gaza. Expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, as well as BRICS, could broaden the security military cooperation between Asia, here namely China, and the Middle East. As for the military personnel, Republic of Korea has deployed its special forces to train the UAE military that would protect the Al-Baraka nuclear power plant from possible terrorist attacks. Although it's a Middle East to Middle East deployment, Turkey has had their forces stationed in Qatar since July 2017, an action that had antagonized its neighbors in the past, which eventually resulted in the Qatar boycott. While the so-called global South, including those countries from the Middle East, is growing uneasy with the apparent double standards applied by the West on Palestine in comparison with Ukraine, China is cultivating on its diplomatic maneuverability by strongly criticizing Israel's occupation policies and making strong calls for the recognition of the Palestinian state. In April 2024, China, Japan, and South Korea did vote in favor of a draft resolution presented by Algeria on Palestine's full membership to the United Nations General Assembly, despite being vetoed by the United States. For the remainder of the year 2024, these three Asian countries share their seats inside the chambers of the United Nations Security Council, where the war on Gaza and the hostage ordeal remains to be a critical issue that need to be resolved without further delay. In general terms, major Asian countries' interest in mainstreaming human rights values are subtle, if not negligible, compared to those of the West that are often explicit. It may sound annoying to some of our audience here, but the reluctance to use universal values as tools against reliable trade partners has existed all the years of Asian way of diplomacy. The relationship will be driven by merits on both sides, rather than by values imposed by one against the other. The silence of the Middle East over the case of the Uyghurs in China is a clear example of how they have turned a blind eye towards fellow Muslims under oppression. Although some countries in Southeast Asia have witnessed a popular movement to invoke BDS, boycott, divest, and sanctions against Israel and its products and services, the ongoing conflict has not generated strong calls for curtailing or terminating business relationships with Israelis in other parts of Asia. Reducing carbon emission, I'm talking about totally different. thing. Reducing carbon emission is a commonality that can bring together both sides of the Eurasian continent. While the oil and gas producers, especially in the Middle East, are known to emit high per capita amount of GHG, the chief importers of fossil fuel in Asia would be in a position to collaborate with the producers and exporters by launching joint projects based on newly developed technologies to curtail or offset the emission. CCUS, carbon capture storage or carbon capture usage and storage, are considered to be the key technology for the future that Asian economies are considering offering to partners in the Middle East. Jointly working on provisions for the production of hydrogen and hydrogen carriers, such as ammonia and NCH, methyl cyclohexane, as well as the development of its storage and transit facilities, could also pave way for future collaboration. Export of nuclear power plants will certainly have a role. South Korea is leading this business with its successful operation in the United Arab Emirates, while China is in pursuit of its proposed deals with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. On the other hand, upholding principles of nuclear non-proliferation will remain as a sticky issue for Asia when it is to deal with the Middle East in this field. Asia and the Middle East, both parties are keen to develop their space and science technology. Here it should be reminded that in 2021, UAE had established a vaccine production facility with the help of the Chinese. While UAE has succeeded in its first satellite launch with the help of Japan in 2018, China and India are there to offer investment and opportunities in the field of space development. Also, there are countries like Iran that have been pursuing its indigenous space program. We could expect to see extended number of activities in this field, along with mega development projects that have been announced by respective governments, such as Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's Neom, Murabba, Mukhara. As we've been looking into the historical relationship and collaboration between Asia and the Middle East, we could be optimistic in witnessing further development of the relations that would encompass multiple new fields of activities while mutually influencing the other party. Let us hope for a brighter future in such relations. I thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Anata. I'm delighted to introduce the moderator and discussant, Professor Bonashir Doraji, Professor of Middle Eastern Politics at Texas Christian University, TCU, our institutional friend and also my personal friend. So he will moderate and discuss the discussion with Professor Bonashir.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Tanaka, for that copious historical as well as contemporary analysis that puts the entire conference on a much broader foundation for us to digest what's happening in current dynamics that we're going to explore in the panels that follow this presentation. And my job is to take questions from the audience and to allow you to come to the microphones that you're going to have here and questions, comments.
Hello, my name is Jordan Harrington. Thank you for taking my question. My question is, how does the Sultanate of Oman fit into the broader picture? What is their relationship with Eastern Asian countries?
Should I take it?
Yes, it's all addressed to you.
Okay.
Equally.
I was thinking whether there would be other questions and to say combine them together. Well, thank you for the question. I have a question. The Sultanate Oman enjoys a very interesting geopolitical location, geographically, and also its role in trying to mediate several, say, issues that have arose within the Gulf region. Also, East Asian countries like Japan, Korea, have considered the Sultanate of Oman as sort of a, not a naval base, but as a location where the naval fleets can stop by and exchange, have sort of they say, exchange programs over there. It also holds, the Sultanate Oman also holds a very, say, unique position by not only dealing with the West, but also with the region. And also, even though it has not signed the so-called Abraham Accords with Israel, it was one of the first Arab nations outside of those two countries, meaning Egypt and Jordan, that have had signed the peace deal with Israel to accept an Israeli prime minister and political delegation to visit officially. So in a way, you could say that Oman, the Sultanate of Oman, and its leadership is trying to balance all sides, the immediate surrounding environment, of course, but also those countries that have influence in the region and has a sort of an economic or military or security interest in and around the Arabian Peninsula.
Please.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Dr. Atesh.
sure. So, again, as Professor Dorash said, as a historian, of course, I thank you for taking us back and showing us that the relations did not start just yesterday. My question is about Korea, South Korea, or Republic of Korea. We always talk about China and Japan and India, but looks like Korea is actually the big elephant in the room. I was in a conference in Japan, and this Korean guy comes and tells the Japanese colleagues like, oh, we made $40 billion deal with this one, $60 billion with that country, 100 billion with this, and Japanese friends were not very happy. So to just his bragging. But my question is, Korea is a very close ally of the West, and especially the United States. How it juggles the whole kind of dealing with Middle East, and especially in security field. I wanted to see what's your perspective on Korea, especially when it comes to the Middle East and the minefields that we have.
Okay, well, thank you again for the excellent question. Yes, you're right. The Koreans, South Koreans are extremely aggressive and active, first in the business field. They've taken away a lot of the advantage that we held in the past in shipbuilding, so many things, even car industry.
And tanks, maybe even tanks,
Tanks meaning the
like military.
military tanks. Of course, I mean, but we are not capable of exporting these items to abroad. So we're not in competition when it comes to military equipment with the Koreans. But still, business-wise or civilian deals and activities, you can say that they are extremely effective and extremely, say, aggressive, and have been doing quite well in the eyes of the Japanese. Yes, so definitely. Security-wise, well, we're neighbors to them, but they have their own problems, meaning DPRK. We have our problems with DPRK, but it's slightly different. We are a bit far away. Well, there is no land connection with them. We don't share a land border with PPRK, but ROK, the Republic of Korea, South Korea does, and their security concerns are graver in the sense that ours. So that's another reason that they remain to be in the Western camp, a close ally to the United States. But since the wartime issues or historical issues between Japan and ROK or the Korean Peninsula has not been totally solved in the eyes of the Koreans, the triangular, say, relationship between us, amongst us Americans and the Koreans, are not that perfect. Well, at the moment, it's relatively better than it used to be in the previous years, but we cannot be sure if there's a change in administration in the in Seoul, that could change overnight. But having said that, Korea does have certain common concerns and interests as we do. First of all, they are dependent on imported energy, just like we are. The only difference is that their nuclear power plants are intact and working, whereas our nuclear power plants had a lot of issues, and still more than half of them have not been rebooted. And it's quite possible that we're not going to be able to construct new power plants in the future. So that's a big difference. But the other thing that we have in common is that, yes, we are heavily relying on imported energy from abroad. When it comes to crude oil, 95% of crude oil that we import comes through the Strait of Hormuz for us. Whereas with the Koreans, it's like 75%. So there's a little bit of difference, but still a heavy reliance. When it comes to LNG, our reliance on Persian Gulf LNG is in the single digits now. Whereas with the Koreans, it's over 30%. So they are heavily dependent on what happens in and out, in and around of the Gulf. But having said that, there is another resemblance, which is that these two countries, meaning Japan and South Korea, the electricity grid, the power grids, are standalones. It is not connected internationally across the border with any of its neighbors.
Texas. This is Texas. We have the same issue here.
Right. But you still have your land that you can extend. Whereas as Japan, as being an archipelago, there is no other neighbor that is going to be connected with us. The Koreans, the South Koreans, meaning that the only location that they can connect is to the north, which is impossible to manage, impossible to say realize. So security-wise, we share some sort of a similar conditions, even on energy.
All right, thank you.
No.
Thank you. My name is Alex Verdunski. I'm, among other things, a fellow at the Hunt Institute. Thank you for your talk today. My question, you made reference to the China's Belt and Road Initiative and its strategic alignment with Saudi Arabia's interests. I wonder if you could expound upon that a little bit. What do you have in mind, and what are the implications of that relationship on that initiative and how it will play regionally?
Thank you. The BRI, a Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese, is sort of an invitation card for the others to, well, hop on. Sort of if it would have a bandwagon effect. But so far, it hasn't materialized in the way that the Chinese have really wanted to see. Problem is because maybe it's not quite certain what their intentions are, just like the grievances that we have over BRI, or that the other countries that have, well, discussed or held negotiations with the Chinese over the BRI have not been convinced enough to see what the benefits would be for them. But having said that, there's a benefit for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be, if not allied with China, but still hold and maintain and expand close relationship with them. And that is the nuclear ambitions that the kingdom holds. As you know, the Americans still haven't signed a 1, 2, 3 agreement with the Saudis, simply because the Saudis are not ready to forfeit their right to enrich. As long as that is there, it's not going to happen, meaning that there is no legal way for the Americans to export your technology, nuclear reactors to the kingdom. But the kingdom requires energy. Okay, they have a lot of crude oil. In recent years, they have been developing their natural gas resources. That's quite fine, but these remain to be fossil fuels. They may want to export them, they may want to use them in other purposes, and equally they would have to reduce their GHG emission. So for their demand for power, demand for electricity, they would want to see a certain amount of nuclear power plants on their soil, which is not unlikely to come from the West, as long as this 1, 2, 3 agreement is lingering. So here, countries like Russia, China, could play a significant role. And that is one reason that the kingdom is extremely keen in expanding their relationships with the Chinese. And not to forget that the Chinese are the largest importers of Saudi crude oil today. It's a big, big customer that they cannot deny. Once we used to be the largest recipient of Saudi oil, but our demand has been on the decline, and now it's like half of the amount that it used to be 25 years ago. The amount of crude that we take from the Middle East. 95% still comes from the Middle East, but the amount is now half of what it used to be. Whereas China, although their economy is in pretty bad shape at the moment, they still happen to be the largest oil importers of the Saudi crude. So there are benefits in both sides that the Saudis see. Buying certain technology, especially related to nuclear power plants or nuclear activities, and as a heavy user or purchaser of the Saudi oil.
Okay, we have 3 hands, and we have to leave in 7 minutes to be precise, according to my instructions. So we start 1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
I know that you are, this on?
It is on.
I know that you have spent a lot of time in Iran studying it. And could you tell us what's the difference? How would you describe the difference in the relationship between China and Iran and Japan and Iran? Could you tell us more about Japanese relationship with Iran?
Okay, why don't you collect all the question? Yes, that gentleman over there, and there was someone else back there. Oh, I see your hand, okay. Go ahead, that gentleman in glasses.
Seems like a lot of power talks. My question is, or comment is also on the energy. China has a very ambitious plan on nuclear power, and they have the world's first 4th generation power plant that came online last year, I think. How do you see Japan, South Korea, and US looking at this as a possible, I guess, kind of a threat when China starts to export a lot of this nuclear generation technology to the Middle East.
Mhm.
Where Japan will come back to nuclear power,
Mhm.
and how is the US going to respond, because US is behind China now.
The last question, yes, and, okay, two, yes.
Just go ahead, Eric.
Okay, give it to that gentleman, please.
Professor Tanaka, thank you for taking my question. I'm a student here. My question is about the US regime change attempt in Syria and the instability there. Where is it going? Is it over? Will there continue to be aggression by Erdogan's Turkey against groups like the Kurds? And is Bashar al-Assad here to stay in power?
Easy question.
Three questions in one,
Yes,
okay,
yes,
go
right.
ahead.
Thank you for all the questions. One of them, every one of them are extremely important and interesting to me. Now, the relationship between Iran and China and Iran and Japan, the difference is, mostly what I see is that, China has an independent foreign policy. We try to have an independent foreign policy, but we tend to care more about how Washington thinks. So in the end, we end up dictating or actually repeating what Washington tells us. So that's the difference. PRCs, the nuclear power plants, how UK, US and ROK or Japan could respond to that question, right? Yes, of course, I mean, we can't stop that from happening. Of course, there's a competition. Could be that they could be more effective in the way that it could be cheaper, it could be safer, they could say. And if there's an opportunity, yes, Japanese vendors would definitely like to export or re-enter the market to export our technology to other countries. Problem is, even prior to Fukushima, we have been losing a lot of contracts. We lost in Turkey, we lost in UAE. The competition is very tough. And those who provide a cheaper set of deals and also assurance that they're going to take control and responsibility for like 40 years to 50 years of operation is not a thing that the Japanese society or a Japanese public, a private entity could undertake and offer. So eventually, there's no way of stopping them, stopping the Chinese or the Koreans or whoever proposes a better deal for the customers. The Syrian regime change issue. Well, I think most of the countries, including the Arab brothers, have already, say, given up about the issue of regime change in Syria. But that doesn't mean that the regime could stay in power as long as it wants, because it's inherently a very difficult system that they are trying to run. The charisma is not there like the father had once. And the Arab Spring since 2011 have caused a lot of grievances and division amongst the population. So it's like, as I see it, is the civil war style condition is likely to prevail for a very long time, even though Damascus and the entourage of Bashar al-Assad himself would not be in danger. But still, it will be difficult for the regime to actually take full control over the entire country.
Please join me thanking Dr. Tanaka
For that excellent presentation and response to the questions, comprehensive
response to questions. I want to invite you all to join us in continuing panels next door to our right. And thank you for your questions and indulgence